Just to get you guys up to speed there, 93% of the players participated in the vote. So 93% of players in the WNBA. And how many is that? Could we do the math? I believe that there's 166 WNBA players times 0.93. Is that right? So 154 players voted and 3 players. So only 3 players voted no to the authorization of a strike.
The WNBA Players Association's recent decision to authorize a strike has been framed publicly as a historic show of unity. But once you strip away the slogans and social media applause, what remains is a far more complicated and uncomfortable reality. Yes, an overwhelming majority of players supported the authorization. Yes, the percentage looks decisive on paper. But a strike authorization is not a strike, and context matters. This vote happened during the off-season, when no games are being played, no tickets are being sold, and no television windows are being activated. The symbolism is loud, but the leverage is quiet. That distinction is not semantics. It is the entire story. A work stoppage only functions as a bargaining weapon when labor withdrawal creates immediate and measurable economic pressure. Right now, there is nothing to withdraw. The league calendar is dormant. Players are training individually, rehabbing, playing overseas, or participating in off-season ventures. The league itself is not currently generating WNBA game day revenue. That does not mean the vote is meaningless, but it does mean its practical power is being overstated by many of its loudest defenders. Strike authorization in the off-season is not a shutdown threat. It is a signal. And signals can be ignored if the receiving party believes the sender cannot or will not follow through.
The viewers are not going to follow. They're truly not going to follow. I think it would absolutely be catastrophic if they don't play a 2026 season. Just look at like podcasting, for example, when like Joe Rogan or Alex Cooper went to Spotify and how many people went over there.
What has been largely glossed over in the celebratory coverage is the reality that unanimity did not exist. A small number of players voted against authorizing a strike. Their anonymity has made them convenient to dismiss or mock. But those dissenting votes deserve far more respect than they are receiving. Historically, it is rarely the highest paid or most secure players who are most vulnerable in labor disputes. The financial pain of a missed season does not distribute evenly. Players on rookie-scale contracts, minimum deals, or non-guaranteed situations feel that pain first and longest. They lose salary, exposure, roster continuity, and sometimes their place in the league altogether. The stars will survive almost any scenario. They have endorsements, overseas contracts, league-backed marketing power, and in some cases equity or leadership roles in new basketball ventures. Mid-rotation players and end-of-bench players do not have that safety net. For them, a lost season is not a negotiating tactic. It is a career risk. When those players express hesitation about escalating toward a work stoppage, that is not betrayal. It is rational self-preservation. Labor solidarity sounds clean in theory, but real-life consequences are messy, and the players most exposed to those consequences are rarely the ones shaping the public narrative. That brings us to the growing discomfort around overlapping interests in the women's basketball ecosystem. Several of the league's most influential players are simultaneously deeply involved in alternative professional ventures that exist outside the WNBA structure. These ventures are often described as complementary, and in many ways they are, but in the context of collective bargaining, the optics are impossible to ignore. When players who help lead union strategy also have business interests in non-WNBA leagues or off-season platforms, it complicates perceptions of incentive and risk. Even if intentions are pure, public trust is fragile, and perception often matters as much as fact. If the WNBA season were delayed, shortened, or lost, those alternative platforms would immediately benefit from increased attention, talent concentration, and fan curiosity. That does not mean anyone is rooting for a shutdown, but it does mean the risk calculus is not shared equally across the player pool. For the average fan, this nuance gets lost. For league executives, sponsors, and broadcasters, it does not. Negotiations are not just about numbers on a spreadsheet. They are about confidence in the stability of the product. Another uncomfortable truth is that fans are far less portable than many assume. Women's basketball has spent decades building a centralized ecosystem with consistent branding, broadcast partnerships, and institutional legitimacy. That infrastructure cannot simply be replicated by goodwill and star power alone. Casual viewers who discovered the league through recent surges in visibility are not die-hard consumers of women's basketball across all formats. They are WNBA fans. Fragment the product, and a significant portion of that audience will not follow out of principle or protest. They will simply drift away. This is why the idea that players can easily shift leverage by playing elsewhere is overstated. Alternative leagues, exhibitions, and off-season competitions serve important roles, but they do not have the capacity, infrastructure, or media footprint to replace the WNBA at scale. They cannot absorb full rosters. They cannot replicate national broadcast consistency. They cannot provide the same level of long-term career visibility. If a WNBA season disappears, the league loses momentum, but the players lose income, continuity, and cultural relevance at a moment when the sport is finally breaking through. The league, for its part, has responded with a notably restrained public posture. Its messaging has emphasized proposed salary growth, structural reform, and long-term revenue sharing models that expand as league income grows. The specifics remain confidential, which invites skepticism, but the tone has been measured. In contrast, the union's public language has leaned heavily on emotional framing, characterizing offers as dismissive or insulting without fully articulating the counterfactual. That strategy may energize internal solidarity, but it risks alienating undecided fans and business partners who are less interested in rhetoric than outcomes. Amid this tension, a few prominent players have voiced what should be considered a reasonable position: the need for compromise. Advocating for a deal that keeps the league on the court is not capitulation. It is an acknowledgement of how fragile momentum can be in professional sports. Growth is not permanent. Attention is not guaranteed. Every season builds on the last, and missing one at a critical inflection point can undo years of progress. Suggesting that reality should not be controversial, yet the online response to such comments has revealed how polarized the discourse has become. What often gets lost in these debates is that collective bargaining is not about moral victory. It is about leverage, timing, and trade-offs. No side ever gets everything at once. The most likely outcome here is not a dramatic shutdown or a total concession. It is a negotiated settlement that includes meaningful salary increases, structural improvements, and face-saving language for both sides. That is how most labor disputes in professional sports end, regardless of how fiery the rhetoric becomes along the way. The concern is not where this likely ends, but what damage is incurred before it does. Public infighting erodes trust. Repeated strike talk during a growth surge creates uncertainty for sponsors and broadcasters. Fans who only recently invested emotionally in the league are being asked to learn the intricacies of revenue sharing instead of enjoying the product. That is not how you convert curiosity into loyalty. Momentum is the most fragile asset in sports, especially in leagues still fighting for consistent mainstream attention. The WNBA finally has it. Attendance is up. Ratings are up. Cultural relevance is up. That does not mean players should settle for less than they deserve, but it does mean every strategic decision should be weighed against what is at stake beyond the negotiating room. A lost season would not be a reset. It would be a setback with consequences that linger far longer than any single CBA cycle. Those few dissenting votes in the strike authorization are not signs of weakness. They are reminders that risk is not evenly distributed and that caution has a place in collective action. Sometimes the hardest position to take is the one that acknowledges both the need for progress and the cost of delay. As this process moves forward, the question is not who is right or wrong in the abstract. It is whether the league and its players can recognize that their futures are still deeply intertwined. If a deal is reached and play continues uninterrupted, this moment will fade into a footnote, remembered only by labor lawyers and diehard fans. If it collapses into a work stoppage, it will be remembered as a turning point, not because of ideology, but because of timing. The WNBA is at a crossroads where growth, leverage, and responsibility intersect. Navigating that intersection requires more than unity slogans. It requires clear-eyed realism about what can be won, what can be lost, and who ultimately pays the price when the games stop. To understand the true stakes of this moment, you have to move beyond the surface-level framing of labor versus ownership and examine how leverage actually functions in modern professional sports, particularly in leagues that are still in a growth phase. In established leagues with entrenched media deals and decades of consumer habit, a strike disrupts something people already feel entitled to. In the WNBA, the league is still fighting to convert interest into ritual. That difference fundamentally alters the bargaining landscape. The players are negotiating from a position of rising visibility, not entrenched indispensability, and those are not the same thing. From a tactical standpoint, strike authorization is typically used as a late-stage pressure tool, not an early positioning move. In past labor disputes across sports, Unions have waited until the threat of lost games was immediate and undeniable before escalating. The reason is simple: urgency sharpens compromise. By authorizing a strike far ahead of the season, the union may have gained internal solidarity, but it has also given the league time. Time to prepare financially, time to message publicly, and time to wait for external pressure to cool. Leverage diminishes when deadlines feel abstract, and right now the most consequential deadline still exists in theory more than reality. Psychologically, this dynamic favors the league. Ownership groups and league officers are conditioned to withstand prolonged negotiations. They budget for it. They plan for it. Players, on the other hand, live in shorter cycles. Careers are finite. Windows close quickly. Missing a year at age 22 is not the same as missing a year at 32, but both carry costs that never fully disappear. The mental toll of uncertainty, particularly for players without guaranteed security, compounds over time. That psychological pressure is rarely discussed publicly, but it has historically played a decisive role in how labor disputes resolve. There is also a misalignment between internal union morale and external public perception. Internally, strong rhetoric reinforces unity and resolve. Externally, it risks alienating casual fans who are still learning how to emotionally invest in the league. Most fans do not view labor disputes through a structural or ideological lens. They experience them as absence. No games means no attachment, no habit formation, no weekly narrative. The longer that absence lasts, the easier it becomes to replace with something else. Sports history is filled with examples of leagues that underestimated how quickly attention moves on. The WNBA does not need to look far for cautionary tales. The 2004-05 NHL lockout erased an entire season, and while the league eventually recovered, it took years to regain its pre-lockout momentum, especially in non-traditional markets. Major League Baseball's 1994 strike permanently altered fan trust in some cities. Even the NBA's shorter lockouts disrupted growth trajectories, particularly internationally. The common thread in all of these cases is not that the players were wrong to demand more, but that timing and proportionality mattered far more than rhetoric acknowledged in the moment. Statistically, the WNBA is negotiating during one of the strongest upward curves in its history. Attendance growth, broadcast engagement, and merchandise sales have all shown meaningful increases. That growth strengthens the players' argument for a larger share, but it also raises the opportunity cost of interruption. Every season compounds the next. Media partners renegotiate based on recent performance, not hypothetical future potential. Sponsors invest where continuity exists. A missed season does not pause that curve, it breaks it, and restarting is never linear. There is also a league-wide structural reality that complicates the union's leverage. The WNBA's financial ecosystem is still intertwined with broader basketball infrastructure. While the league has made strides toward independence, it does not operate in isolation. That gives ownership an additional buffer against short-term disruption that players do not share. A league can survive a dormant year. Individual careers cannot be paused and resumed without consequence. That asymmetry matters, even if it feels uncomfortable to acknowledge. Long-term, the most significant risk is not economic but cultural. The WNBA is in the middle of redefining how it is perceived by the general sports audience. It is transitioning from niche respect to mainstream relevance. That transition is fragile. It depends on consistency, visibility, and narrative continuity. Labor disputes interrupt storytelling. They turn attention inward at the exact moment the league should be outward-facing. Fans who are still forming emotional bonds do not distinguish between principled protest and organizational dysfunction. They simply see instability. This does not mean the players should accept any deal placed in front of them. It means that maximizing gains requires an understanding of when pressure peaks and when restraint preserves long-term power. The smartest labor victories in sports history were not total victories. They were strategically timed compromises that expanded future bargaining power by strengthening the product itself. Growth today is leverage tomorrow. Undermining that growth weakens the very position the union hopes to improve. Ultimately, this moment will be judged less by percentages in a vote and more by outcomes on the court. If a deal is reached and the league continues its upward trajectory, the strike authorization will be remembered as a pressure tactic that helps secure progress. If games are lost, momentum stalls, and fans disengage, it will be remembered as a miscalculation driven by overconfidence in leverage that did not fully exist yet. The difference between those outcomes will not hinge on slogans or solidarity posts. It will hinge on whether both sides recognize that the WNBA's greatest asset right now is not revenue or rhetoric, but continuity.